What would you do if your brand new lake mansion was invaded by over 100 strangers because your HOA president decided your home was community property? What would you do if the home you worked your whole life to buy, your personal sanctuary, was suddenly treated like a public playground by complete strangers? That's exactly what happened to Omarian Leclair, and it all began the moment he thought he had finally secured peace. Omarian was 50 years old when he closed on the kind of property that most people only see in magazines. After decades of long nights in the tech world, endless flights, and years of pressure that left him feeling like he lived out of a suitcase, he wanted one thing: stillness. He found it in a sprawling mansion on Lake Norman in North Carolina's Piedmont region. The house itself wasn't just large, it was intentional. Wide glass doors opened toward the lake, so every sunrise spilled into the living room like a slow-motion painting. The backyard rolled into a green slope that ended at a private dock, where Omarian imagined tying up a small boat or sitting with a fishing pole when his days in consulting were finally over. Inside, the rooms echoed with possibility: polished wood floors, a high-ceilinged kitchen for hosting dinner parties, and a fireplace he pictured himself sitting beside when the air turned sharp in late fall. To Omarian, this wasn't just a house. It was a reward. He'd grown up in Fayetteville, in a modest neighborhood, where the idea of a lake mansion sounded like fantasy. His parents, hard-working but stretched thin, taught him early that if he wanted more, he had to go get it himself. He remembered his mother saying one night at the kitchen table, "If you want peace in this life, you'll have to build it with your own two hands." That stuck with him, and when the keys hit his palm on closing day, he felt like he was finally living out her words. The first week, he hardly left the property. He unpacked slowly, savoring the process instead of rushing through it. He cooked in his own kitchen for the first time in years, instead of relying on hotel meals. He even woke up early one morning, stepped out onto the dock barefoot, and kayaked into the open water, the world so still it almost felt sacred. Neighbors waved politely when they saw him, though Omarian noticed a curious pattern. Most of the greetings weren't warm introductions. They were more like quick once-overs, sizing him up before moving on. He didn't think much of it. After all, he wasn't here to make best friends. He just wanted privacy. But in the weeks that followed, he couldn't ignore the subtle but growing tension. HOA board notices appeared in his mailbox almost immediately. Reminders about lawn maintenance, suggestions about what colors his deck chairs should be, even a warning about his choice of fencing. At first he thought it was just the normal grind of HOA oversight. Yet behind the paperwork, one name appeared over and over again: Geraldine Caffrey, the president of the Homeowners Association. Omarian hadn't met her yet, but neighbors muttered about her in passing. One called her unyielding. Another rolled his eyes and muttered, "She thinks she runs the entire shoreline." Omarian laughed it off at the time. He figured he could deal with a bossy HOA president as long as she stayed out of his personal space. But little did he know, Geraldine Caffrey was already paying close attention to him. She wasn't the kind of woman who welcomed new neighbors with a plate of cookies. She was the kind who measured where your trash cans sat, who whispered to others about your landscaping choices, and who believed the HOA bylaws gave her near-governmental authority. For Omarian, this house represented independence. For Geraldine, his arrival was just another property under her watch. And soon, their visions for what that house stood for would collide in a way that no one on Lake Norman would forget. But Omarian didn't see the storm coming yet. He was still in that golden first chapter of ownership, believing his lakefront dream was finally secure. Omarian's first real introduction to Geraldine Caffrey came not through a handshake or a friendly hello, but through a letter slipped under his front door. It wasn't typed on standard paper. It was heavy stock, embossed with the HOA's crest like it was some kind of royal decree. The letter read, "We noticed your dock light does not match the uniform style of the community. Please make immediate adjustments." He chuckled at first, shaking his head. "The dock light?" he muttered to himself. He'd barely been there 2 weeks, and already the HOA had opinions on something as trivial as a light bulb. Still, he didn't make changes right away. He figured they'd back off. But he underestimated Geraldine. Geraldine wasn't just a neighborhood president. She was the kind of person who saw rules as weapons, not guidelines. In her 60s, but sharp as a tack, she had thinning blonde hair always tied back tightly, and a way of speaking that sounded less like conversation and more like a closing argument in court. For 20 years, she'd been running the Homeowners Association like her personal kingdom, and most of the residents had grown weary of challenging her. She thrived on compliance. One Saturday morning, Omarian finally met her face-to-face. He was on his front porch, sipping coffee, when she marched up the driveway without hesitation. Her stride was deliberate, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "You must be Mr. Leclair," she said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, ma'am," Omarian replied, setting his mug down. "And you are?" "Geraldine Caffrey, president of the Lake Norman Homeowners Association," she said with a tone that made the title sound more important than it was. "I like to welcome our new residents personally." Omarian extended his hand, but Geraldine simply nodded and began glancing around his porch. "I trust you've received our notices?" "I've seen a few letters, yes," he said, keeping his voice polite. "Good. We maintain a very specific aesthetic here. It's what keeps property values high and ensures harmony among neighbors." She pointed at his deck chairs. "Those should be a neutral color. Nothing too bold. And your dock lighting?" "Well, you've been told about that already." Omarian raised his eyebrows. "I just moved in. I think I deserve a little time to settle before repainting chairs and changing light bulbs." Her lips tightened. "Of course. But understand, Mr. Leclair, our rules apply equally to everyone." He didn't miss the way she emphasized everyone. He gave a slow nod, not looking for confrontation. "Noted," he said calmly. That night, though, Omarian called a friend to vent. "Man, I thought I left micromanagement behind when I left corporate life," he laughed into the phone. "Now I've got this woman walking around like she owns the shoreline." His friend chuckled. "HOS, brother. They'll find a way to control how you breathe if you let them. Don't take it too seriously." But Geraldine wasn't content with enforcing rules on Omarian. Within weeks, she was spreading her influence in more personal ways. Neighbors would mention in casual conversation, "Geraldine was asking if you plan to host events." Or, "She said you might be open to community gatherings." Omarian would shake his head each time. "I didn't say that," he'd reply, puzzled at where the rumors started. The truth was, Geraldine saw his mansion not as a private home, but as a resource, a jewel she could leverage to elevate her status and give the HOA more prestige. In her mind, Omarian's property wasn't just his. It was, in some twisted way, part of her domain. One evening, Omarian ran into a couple at the local grocery store who lived 3 doors down. They struck up a light chat, but the wife leaned in conspiratorially and asked, "So are you really letting the HOA host a big party at your place this summer?" Geraldine mentioned it. Omarian blinked. "What number? Absolutely not." The husband chuckled nervously. "Ah, maybe we misunderstood. You know how Geraldine gets." Walking back to his car, Omarian felt a strange churn in his stomach. This was more than rule enforcement. Geraldine was planting seeds, shaping a narrative about his house without his consent. He brushed it aside for the moment, but it gnawed at him. Geraldine, on the other hand, was emboldened. She began speaking openly at HOA meetings about community cohesion and the need for larger gathering spaces. Some residents pushed back lightly, but her authority was rarely questioned. And when she floated the idea of hosting her nephew's graduation party somewhere scenic, everyone in the room already knew which property she had in mind. But Omarian had no idea that Geraldine's schemes were already moving forward, and by the time he found out, it would be far too late to stop her plans quietly. The plan started small, just whispers among the HOA members who lingered after meetings. Geraldine leaned across the table one evening at a neighbor's home, her voice calm but confident. "My nephew is graduating this spring. It's a big moment for our family," she began, stirring sugar into her tea. "We don't have a venue that feels special enough here, but Mr. Leclair's mansion, well, that house was made for celebrating." The group exchanged uncertain looks. A few cleared their throats. One man, Douglas Renfro, a retired banker, shifted in his seat. Geraldine, that's not your property to use. Geraldine waved off the objection with a practiced smile. Oh, Douglas, don't be so rigid. Omarian is new here. He hasn't fully embraced our community yet. This would be a perfect way for him to show goodwill. Her ally, Patrice Elwood, chimed in quickly. It's true. Imagine the pictures by that lake, the dock, the view from the patio. It would reflect well on all of us. But he hasn't agreed, Douglas pressed. Geraldine leaned back, tapping her pen on the table. He doesn't need to agree. The HOA has discretionary rights over common use expectations. If we present it as a community event, he'll hardly have ground to stand on that single statement, half true, mostly misleading, was enough to sway the hesitant members. They'd grown accustomed to Geraldine's interpretation of rules. If she said it could be done, most people stopped questioning. Within days, the whispers spread through the neighborhood. Invitations were drafted. Geraldine called caterers and a DJ. She even arranged valet parking through a friend's son at the local college. The graduation party grew from a modest gathering to a full-scale event with a guest list topping 100. Meanwhile, Omarian was entirely in the dark. One evening, he invited a few colleagues from Raleigh over for dinner. They sat on the patio, laughing over grilled salmon and a bottle of wine, when his neighbor, Sharon Dupree, stopped by. She leaned over the railing with a grin. Excited about the big party? She asked. Omarian tilted his head. What party? Sharon blinked. Geraldine said you were hosting a graduation bash for her nephew. The whole neighborhood's buzzing about it. Omarian set his fork down slowly. That's news to me. His guests exchanged puzzled glances. Sharon's smile faltered. Oh, maybe I misunderstood, she muttered, backing away. The next morning, Omarian knocked on Geraldine's door. She answered briskly, clipboard in hand, as if she had been waiting for him. Morning, Geraldine. I keep hearing about a party at my house. You want to explain that? Her expression never wavered. It's a community celebration, Omarian. Your home has the perfect space, and everyone is looking forward to it. Think of it as your chance to integrate I never gave you permission, he said firmly. Geraldine's smile thinned. Sometimes it's not about permission, it's about participation. This neighborhood thrives on cooperation. That's not cooperation, that's trespassing. Her eyes hardened. Careful with your words, Mr. Leclair. You wouldn't want to appear unneighborly. The conversation ended there, but Omarian walked back down her driveway with a cold realization. Geraldine was not asking. She was declaring. Over the next week, signs of preparation appeared around him. Caterers visited the street to measure spaces. Teenagers with clipboards marked off parking along the private road. A rental company dropped off tents under the guise of early storage. Omarian confronted each worker, but they all said the same thing. We were hired by the HOA president. Omarian called his attorney, Victor Hensley, to ask what recourse he had. You own the property outright, Omarian, Victor said. They can't do a thing without your consent. Then why does it feel like they're steamrolling me? Omarian asked. Because people like Geraldine count on intimidation. But if she goes through with this, she'll have no legal ground. Document everything. Take photos. Save emails. If they set foot on your property without your consent, it's trespassing. Plain and simple. Omarian exhaled slowly. All right, I'll be ready. But no amount of readiness could have prepared him for what would come. Because while Omarian was planning to protect his home, Geraldine was planning to invade it, with the force of an entire neighborhood behind her. The weekend of the graduation party arrived, and with it came a tidal wave of strangers rolling straight into Omarian's sanctuary. He had left early Friday afternoon for a short consulting trip to Durham, thinking he'd return to peace on Sunday. But peace was the last thing waiting for him. By Saturday evening, Lake Norman's quiet shoreline had turned into something closer to a festival ground. Cars lined up down the private drive, their headlights cutting across manicured lawns. Guests in bright summer outfits carried cases of beer and balloons through Omarian's gates as though they owned the place. Geraldine stood at the top of the driveway, clipboard in hand, directing traffic like she was running a convention. Yes, park down there by the hedges, she ordered a group of college kids. No, no, not the lawn. Stay on the gravel, she barked instructions with authority, her voice carrying over the music already blaring from rented speakers on the patio. Inside the house, it was chaos. Someone had pried open a side door. Later, neighbors swore they saw Geraldine hand a spare key to a caterer. Trays of food cluttered the kitchen counters. Teenagers spilled soda on the hardwood floors. A group of women wandered through Omarian's master bedroom, giggling as they tried on his jackets and snapped pictures in front of his full-length mirror. Out back, the pool overflowed with guests. Kids cannonballed into the water, splashing onto the imported lounge chairs Omarian had carefully chosen. A DJ cranked up music so loud, the bass rattled glass doors. On the dock, teenagers dangled their legs over the water while others climbed onto Omarian's boat to take selfies. Neighbors who hadn't been invited directly showed up anyway, following the noise. They treated the mansion like a public event space, not a private home. Strangers roamed freely, opening cabinets, rifling through drawers, even leaving wet footprints across the rugs. One guest, Trevor Mendez, later admitted, "Honestly, I thought Omarian had given permission." Geraldine said it was fine. I figured, hey, if the HOA president says it's approved, it must be. But Omarian hadn't approved anything. His name was being tossed around casually by Geraldine as if he were a silent sponsor. She mingled through the crowd in a bright floral dress, introducing herself as the event organizer, accepting praise for her planning skills. She soaked in the compliments like a queen among loyal subjects. "Isn't this perfect?" she beamed to Patrice Elwood. "The lake, the mansion, the sense of community. This is exactly what we needed." Patrice raised a glass. "Only you could pull this off, Geraldine." By midnight, the lawn was littered with bottles, plates, and crumpled napkins. The once pristine deck bore scratches from dragged furniture. The sound of laughter and shouting carried across the lake, disturbing residents half a mile away. Meanwhile, Omarian, finishing his work obligations in Durham, received a text from an old colleague who happened to live near the lake. "Big party at your place tonight. Looks wild." Omarian frowned at the screen. "Party?" He quickly called his neighbor, Sharon Dupree. She answered with a nervous laugh. "Omarian!" "I thought you knew." Geraldine said it was all set. "The whole neighborhood's there." Geraldine said, "What?" Omarian's voice tightened. "I'm sorry, I assumed you approved." "Your driveway is packed. They even have valet out front." Omarian gripped the steering wheel, rage simmering in his chest. "I didn't approve a damn thing. That's my home. My property." When he hung up, his hands trembled. He wanted to drive straight back that night, but exhaustion and distance held him back. Instead, he lay awake in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Sharon's words in his mind. By the time the party ended, it wasn't just the music that had shaken the mansion. It was the foundation of trust between Omarian and his neighbors. Photos and videos from the night began appearing on social media. Teens posing by his pool, adults clinking glasses in his living room, hashtags like #LakeMansionVibes attached to pictures of his private dock. But what Omarian didn't yet realize was how deep the damage ran and how much it would cost him, not just in dollars, but in the violation of everything he had built. Sunday afternoon, Omarian turned into his private drive, and the sight that met him stopped his car cold. His once pristine lawn was scarred by deep tire ruts. Plastic cups and beer bottles rolled across the grass with the breeze. A torn banner that read, "Congrats, Dylan," flapped loosely from his porch railing. For a moment, he sat in silence behind the wheel, jaw tightening as the full scope of it came into view. Stepping out of his car, the air smelled of stale alcohol and chlorine. He walked toward his front door, crunching broken glass beneath his shoes. The welcome mat was soaked with something sticky, and cigarette butts were ground into the wooden planks. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, only to freeze in disbelief. His living room looked like the aftermath of a college frat party. Furniture was overturned. A sofa cushion lay ripped open, stuffing spilling out like feathers. Someone had left greasy fingerprints on his glass coffee table. A half-eaten plate of barbecue sat abandoned on the rug, leaving a stain that would never completely come out. Omarian? It was his neighbor, Sharon, standing sheepishly at the edge of the driveway. You're back already? He turned to her, anger simmering beneath his calm tone. What happened here? She wrung her hands. Geraldine, she said it was all cleared with you. Everyone thought you knew. I didn't realize you hadn't agreed until I heard you last night. Omarian gestured toward his ruined home. This looks cleared to you? Sharon swallowed hard. I'm so sorry. I should have called you earlier, but you know how Geraldine is. When she says something, people just believe it. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked deeper into the house. His imported rugs, thousands of dollars each, were ruined with stains. In the kitchen, cabinet doors hung open, chips and dip crusted onto the counters. Wine bottles leaned empty in the sink, corks scattered like confetti. Upstairs, his master bedroom told an even more infuriating story. Shoes on the duvet, lipstick smeared across the bathroom mirror. His closet door left wide open, with hangers swinging where jackets once hung neatly. By the time he reached the dock, his fury had solidified into something heavier. Wooden boards were cracked from where teenagers had jumped recklessly. The rail on one side hung loose, screws yanked out. His boat's cover was half torn, water pooled on the seats. It was no longer the serene retreat he had envisioned. It looked like a public beach after a holiday weekend. That evening, Omarian sat at his kitchen table with his phone in hand. His first call was to Geraldine. She answered with the same briskness she always carried. Mr. Leclair, I was just about to follow up about the event. Tremendous success, wouldn't you say? Omarian gripped the phone tighter. You broke into my house. You trashed my property. You had no right. Oh, now don't exaggerate, she said smoothly. No one broke in. We had access for the sake of community needs. Besides, you should be proud. Everyone had a wonderful time. Your home brought people together. Brought people together? His voice rose. My furniture is ruined, my dock is destroyed, and strangers were wearing my clothes. That's not community. That's trespassing. Geraldine's tone cooled. Careful, Omarian. Words like that carry weight. The HOA has broad discretion over community use. You wouldn't want to be seen as combative so soon after moving in. Combative, he repeated, disbelief dripping from the word. You violated my home. Do you have any idea how much damage was done? There was a pause. Repairs can always be made, she replied, dismissive. But your attitude right now, that will leave an impression. If you want to fit in here, you should consider how you address your neighbors. Omarian hung up before he said something he'd regret. He sat in silence for a long moment, his heart pounding, until he finally called his attorney, Victor. Victor, it happened, he said flatly. She used my house. Over 100 people. Damages everywhere. Document it, Victor instructed. Every stain, every crack, every scratch. Photos, video, the works. And don't let her intimidate you. She has no legal right to do what she did. Omarian grabbed his camera and started snapping pictures. Each flash captured another violation. The ruined sofa, the shattered lamp, the gouges in his dock. Every click felt like ammunition. He wasn't just documenting damage. He was building a case. As night fell, he sat in his living room surrounded by the wreckage, the smell of spilled beer lingering in the air. He had come here seeking peace, and instead he found himself staring at the remnants of a party he never agreed to host. But if Geraldine thought he would roll over quietly, she was about to learn that Omarian Leclair wasn't the type of man to be bullied into submission. The morning after his return, Omarian woke up to the same mess that had haunted him the night before. He barely touched his coffee as he stared across the lake, the sound of loose boards creaking on his dock. By 9 o'clock, he'd had enough. He grabbed his keys, slid into his car, and drove straight to Geraldine Caffrey's home 2 streets over. Her house was as meticulous as her personality. White shutters, manicured shrubs trimmed to sharp points, and a flagpole flying both the American flag and a Homeowners Association banner. Omarian parked at the curb and walked up the driveway, each step deliberate. He knocked once, firmly. Seconds later, Geraldine appeared, perfectly composed in a pastel blouse, a fresh clipboard tucked under her arm. Omarian, she said, her tone almost rehearsed. I was wondering when you might stop by. Come in. He didn't step inside. Instead, he stood tall in the doorway. We need to talk. Right now, her smile thinned, but she motioned toward the porch. Very well. Let's discuss it here. Why did you do it? He asked directly. Why did you take over my home without permission? Geraldine tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his bluntness. Oh, come now. It wasn't an invasion. It was a celebration, a community event. Everyone loved it. Your property was the perfect backdrop. My property is not a backdrop, he shot back. It's my home. You had no right. She sighed, her tone dripping with condescension. You're new here, Omarian. You don't yet understand how things work in Lake Norman Estates. The HOA makes decisions for the good of everyone. Sometimes individuals need to make small sacrifices for the greater community. That wasn't a small sacrifice, he said, his voice rising. You broke things. You let strangers walk through my bedroom. My dock is damaged. My clothes were touched. That's not community spirit. That's trespassing. Geraldine stiffened. Trespassing is a harsh word. Our bylaws allow for shared spaces. Shared spaces? Omarian cut her off. Geraldine, my house isn't a park. It's not a clubhouse. It's not owned by the HOA. I bought it. With my money. You don't get to rewrite property law because it suits your ego. Her expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. If you want to live here peacefully, you'd be wise not to escalate things. Lawsuits, conflicts, they make for an uncomfortable neighborhood. For a moment, silence hung between them. Omarian's jaw clenched as he studied her, realizing she truly believed she could intimidate him into silence. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice calm but edged with steel. You think you can scare me into compliance? You're wrong. What you did was illegal, and I'm not going to let it slide. You'll be hearing from my attorney. Geraldine's composure faltered for just a second before she straightened her clipboard against her chest. Do what you feel you must, she said coolly. But remember, the community tends to side with me. Omarian stepped back. Then the community will learn what happens when they trample on someone's rights. He turned and walked away, his footsteps sharp against the pavement. That evening, word spread quickly. Omarian had confronted Geraldine and threatened legal action. Some neighbors sympathized quietly, admitting they thought Geraldine had gone too far. Others muttered that Omarian was overreacting, that suing the HOA would only make life harder. But Omarian didn't care about gossip. He cared about the truth. He sat down with his attorney, Victor Hensley, that same week, handing over hundreds of photos and detailed notes of every broken chair, every stain, every scratch. Victor leaned back in his chair after reviewing the evidence. This isn't just trespassing, Omarian. It's willful property damage. You've got a strong case. I don't want just damages, Omarian said firmly. I want accountability. Every single person who set foot on my property without permission needs to feel the weight of what they did. Victor nodded slowly. Then we go big. We'll file against Geraldine, the HOA, and every guest. $100,000 each, Omarian exhaled. Good. Let them see what entitlement costs. But while Omarian prepared for battle with legal precision, Geraldine was already rallying her allies, convinced she could talk her way out of anything once the spotlight turned on her. The official filing hit the courthouse in Mooresville on a Tuesday morning. The case name was bold at the top: Leclair versus Caffrey et al. It wasn't just Geraldine who was named. Every single guest who attended the party appeared on the list, over 100 names in total. The demand was clear: $100,000 in damages from each trespasser. Within hours, the neighborhood was buzzing. Omarian didn't need to tell anyone. Word traveled faster than wildfire. People whispered on sidewalks, stopped each other in grocery store aisles, and exchanged frantic phone calls. Did you hear? He's suing all of us, not just the HOA, everyone who went to that party. My nephew's on the list. At the center of it all was Geraldine, who tried to keep her composure as the panic spread. She hosted an emergency HOA meeting at her home that very evening. Her living room filled with nervous neighbors, some clutching copies of the lawsuit papers they'd been served. "This is absurd," Geraldine declared, standing at the front of the room like a general before her troops. "He can't possibly expect to win. It was a community gathering." No one intended harm. Douglas Renfro raised his hand, his voice shaking. "Intent doesn't matter, Geraldine. We were on his property without permission. My granddaughter was at that party. She's on the list. You said it was fine. You said he knew." Geraldine's jaw tightened. "And I'll continue to say it. I acted under the authority of the HOA. That protects us." "Protects us?" Patrice Elwood interjected, her voice edged with panic. "If the court sides with him, we're ruined. Do you realize the scale of this? 100 names. That's millions." The room erupted with nervous chatter. Some residents looked at Geraldine with anger, others with desperation. She raised her hand for silence. "Listen to me. This is posturing. He's trying to scare us into settling. If we stand together, if we push back, he'll fold. Trust me, I've dealt with bluffs before." But not everyone was convinced. A man in the back muttered loudly. "Easy for you to say. You're the one who orchestrated the whole thing." Meanwhile, Omarian stayed quiet in his mansion, focusing on his preparations. Victor, his attorney, had advised him to avoid direct confrontation and let the case speak for itself. But he could feel the shift in the air. Neighbors who once avoided his gaze now stared openly when he drove past, some with sympathy, others with hostility. Late one evening, Omarian bumped into Sharon at the gas station. She approached him cautiously. "Omarian, can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Go ahead. Are you really going after everyone? Even the kids who were there? Some of them didn't even know it wasn't allowed." He paused, then met her eyes. "It's not about revenge, Sharon. It's about responsibility. If you let it slide once, it happens again. This was my home, my safe place. They treated it like a rental hall, and Geraldine convinced them it was fine. Someone has to pay for that," she nodded slowly, though unease lingered in her eyes. The weeks that followed brought waves of gossip and speculation. Some neighbors scrambled to hire their own lawyers. Others pleaded with Geraldine to negotiate with Omarian. Still, Geraldine remained defiant, telling anyone who'd listen that the case would collapse. Behind closed doors, though, cracks began to show. Geraldine's phone calls to her sister revealed her growing fear. "This man is stubborn," she whispered. "He's not backing down." The judge could actually side with him. Her sister's voice on the other end was blunt. Maybe because he's right. But Geraldine refused to see it that way. Omarian, meanwhile, continued documenting everything. He met with Victor regularly, reviewing the photos, estimates for repairs, and legal strategies. Victor explained the plan clearly. "We'll show the court the damage. We'll show how the event was orchestrated under false pretenses. We'll make it clear that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was deliberate misuse of private property." "And what if the community rallies behind her?" Omarian asked. Victor smiled thinly. "Courts don't deal in popularity contests. They deal in facts. And you've got the facts on your side." Omarian leaned back, finally allowing himself a small measure of relief. For the first time since the party, he felt the balance of power shifting. But as the first hearing approached, Geraldine was preparing to twist the narrative, convinced she could charm the courtroom just as she had charmed her neighbors for decades. The courthouse in Mooresville filled quickly the morning of the first hearing. Neighbors who weren't even named in the lawsuit showed up just to watch, whispering in the gallery as Omarian and Geraldine faced each other across the room for the first time since their confrontation on her porch. Omarian sat beside his attorney, Victor Hensley, composed but tense. He wore a navy suit, crisp and deliberate, his hands folded in his lap. Geraldine arrived flanked by 2 HOA board members, dressed in a bright blazer and pearls, her usual air of confidence radiating as if she were chairing a meeting instead of defending herself in court. When the judge, Honorable Miriam Sloan, entered the room, silence settled. She was known locally for her sharp, no-nonsense style, a woman who valued facts over theatrics. Victor opened the case with a steady voice. "Your Honor, this is not a dispute over lawn care or fence colors. This is a matter of a private home invaded by over 100 individuals under the direction of Ms. Geraldine Caffrey. We will show evidence, photos, videos, witness statements, that this was not only unauthorized, but destructive. He laid out photographs of the trashed living room, the stained rugs, the broken dock. One by one, the images passed to the judge, and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Geraldine's attorney, Richard Pendry, stood confidently when it was their turn. "Your Honor, let's not inflate this into something it wasn't. This was a community celebration, a harmless gathering. My client did not act with malice, nor did any attendee. At worst, it was a misunderstanding." Judge Sloan raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding that resulted in damage estimates exceeding $75,000. Richard cleared his throat. "Property can be repaired. Relationships, however, should not be destroyed over technicalities." Omarian clenched his jaw but remained silent. He let Victor do the talking. Then came witness testimonies. Sharon Dupree, visibly nervous, stepped up to the stand. She glanced at Omarian before speaking. I thought he knew about the party. Geraldine told us it was approved. When I realized he hadn't, I called him. I regret not calling sooner," Victor pressed gently. "So you confirm Geraldine stated it was authorized?" "Yes," Sharon whispered. "She said it was cleared." Next was Douglas Renfro. Unlike Sharon, he was furious. He adjusted his glasses, glaring toward Geraldine as he spoke. "I questioned her that night. I told her it wasn't right. She said the HOA had the authority. That's the only reason people went along with it. We trusted her word." The blow landed hard. Geraldine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, scribbling notes on her clipboard that now looked more like a shield than a tool. Finally, Omarian himself took the stand. His voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of hurt. "I bought that house to find peace. I came home to find it trashed, my privacy violated, my belongings handled by people I'd never met. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. A decision that told me my ownership meant nothing to them." The courtroom was silent when he finished. When it was Geraldine's turn, she rose gracefully, her voice honeyed. "Your Honor, I only did what I thought would benefit the community. Mr. Leclair is new. I believed hosting the event at his property would help him integrate, make him feel welcome." Judge Sloan leaned forward. "Did Mr. Leclair ever give you permission to use his home?" Geraldine hesitated, the pause stretching long enough to betray her. "Not explicitly." "Not explicitly?" the judge repeated. "Or not at all?" Geraldine swallowed. "Not at all," she admitted quietly. That was the breaking point. Victor seized the moment. "Your Honor, there it is. She admits she never had consent. Everything else is noise." The ruling came swiftly. Judge Sloan's tone was decisive. "This court finds that the defendants trespassed on Mr. Leclair's property without authorization. Damages are to be awarded. Liability rests both with Ms. Caffrey for orchestrating the event and with each individual attendee who participated." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few audible groans from those listed in the suit. Geraldine sat frozen, her practiced smile gone, her clipboard slipping from her grasp. Omarian felt a surge of vindication wash over him. For the first time since the nightmare began, justice wasn't an abstract hope. It was real, carved into the record. But while the judgment gave Omarian victory, the aftermath was about to tear the community apart in ways no one had anticipated. The judgment spread through Lake Norman estates faster than any rumor Geraldine had ever spun. Within days, every resident named in the suit received notice of financial liability. The number was staggering, $100,000 each. Some households had more than one family member on the list, multiplying the damage. The once proud neighborhood suddenly looked less like a lakeside retreat and more like a battlefield. On morning walks, Omarian noticed the difference immediately. The cheerful waves and forced smiles had vanished. Now, residents whispered behind closed doors, curtains shifted as he drove past, and children who once rode bikes down the cul-de-sac were called inside early. One evening, Sharon knocked on his door, looking worn and defeated. "They're furious, Omarian. Some of them are blaming you more than Geraldine." He sighed, motioning for her to sit. "I didn't break into my own home, Sharon. I didn't host 100 strangers. They need to stop blaming the man who stood up for himself." "I know," she said softly, staring down at her hands. But people are scared. They can't afford these settlements. Some are talking about selling their homes. Omarian leaned forward, his voice steady. Maybe that fear will teach them something about respect. You don't trample on someone else's rights and expect no consequences. Meanwhile, Geraldine's reign over the HOA began to crumble. Board members who once deferred to her now avoided her calls. At an emergency meeting, Douglas Renfro slammed his fist on the table. "You lied to us, Geraldine! You dragged us into this mess! You ruined people's lives!" Her composure cracked. "I was acting in the community's best interest." "No," Douglas shot back, his voice sharp. "You were acting in your own interest. And now the community is paying for it." A vote was called that very night, and for the first time in 2 decades, Geraldine Caffrey was removed as president of the HOA. She stormed out of the meeting, clipboard clutched against her chest, but the air of authority she once carried was gone. Neighbors whispered that she might even lose her own home under the weight of legal costs. The fallout rippled further. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale of HOA overreach and homeowner rights. Headlines read, "Lake Mansion Trespass Sparks $10 million Lawsuit," and "Homeowner Wins Landmark Case Against HOA President." Strangers began sending Omarian letters, some congratulating him, others sharing their own horror stories of overbearing HOAs. One note from a man in Arizona read, "Thank you for standing up. Most of us just give in. You gave people like me hope." Despite the victory, the atmosphere around the neighborhood remained tense. Families feuded quietly behind closed doors. Former friends avoided one another, pointing fingers over who was more responsible for the fiasco. A few households packed up and left entirely, unable to face both the financial burden and the social fracture. For Omarian, the satisfaction of justice was tempered by the cost. He walked his property often, noting the scars that still lingered, the scratches on the deck, the stains on the rugs, the dock that would never quite look the same even after repairs. Each mark was a reminder of the night his home had been violated. One afternoon, he sat on the rebuilt dock with Victor, his attorney. "I won, but it doesn't feel like winning," Omarian admitted. Victor nodded. "That's because this wasn't about money for you. It was about principle. And principles don't always come with easy endings." Omarian stared out across the lake, the water glinting in the afternoon sun. "Maybe so, but if one person thinks twice before pulling something like this again, then it was worth it." The HOA never fully recovered. New leadership struggled to rebuild trust, but the fractures remained. Geraldine, once the self-styled queen of the neighborhood, was seen less and less. Some said she had taken up residence with her sister in another county. Others claimed she stayed in her house, blinds drawn, avoiding everyone. For Omarian, life moved forward, slower and quieter than he had expected, but stronger too. He had proven to himself, and to everyone else, that his home wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was his sanctuary, and no one had the right to take that from him. But the story wasn't done until Omarian himself shared what he had learned, because behind the legal battle was a lesson that reached far beyond one lakefront mansion. Months after the judgment, the neighborhood still carried the scars of what had happened. Driveways that once hosted block parties were now eerily quiet. Some houses had "for sale" signs staked in the yard. Others looked the same on the outside, but inside, families struggled with the financial weight of settlements. What was once considered one of the most desirable lake communities in the state now had a reputation tangled with scandal and lawsuits. Omarian, however, had moved on in his own way. He repaired what could be repaired: new rugs, new dock boards, fresh coats of paint. But more than the repairs, he invested in peace of mind. Security cameras lined his property, and gates that were once left open during the day now stayed firmly shut. One Saturday afternoon, he invited Sharon over for coffee. She sat at his kitchen table, looking uneasy, stirring her drink without taking a sip. "You know," she said finally, "some of the neighbors still think you went too far." Omarian leaned back in his chair. "Maybe I did. Maybe suing everyone was more than they expected. But Sharon, ask yourself this. If I hadn't, What would have stopped them from doing it again? What's the line between community spirit and outright entitlement? She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on her cup. It's just, nobody ever stood up to Geraldine before. People thought she was untouchable. And look where that got them, Omarian replied.